It is a Tuesday, so you know what that means. We are going to have Matt Lawson back on to talk about fantasy basketball. We're going to talk about dynasty leagues, as we always do. And this time, we're going to take a look at a lot of the movement that has happened. Some of it through free agency, some of it through trades. Just kind of take a look at how some of these rotations are going to look next season, where we still need to probably get some answers from certain teams. A lot has already changed at this point. There's still potentially a lot more that can happen. It could be small moves. It could be some big moves. Maybe we'll see. There's a couple more months before we get back to the NBA's regular season. So a lot of that will probably be pretty quiet, but rumors can heat up really, really quickly. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, obviously, throughout the summer to see what else changes. But at this point, so much has already changed that we can go ahead and take a decent look at what it's going to look like next season. Matt has already been projecting out rotations for next year that is updated after every move. When he first sent it to me, I took a look. He was able to see it. And then the Norman Powell, John Collins, Kevin Love trade happened. Checked it later that day. It was already updated. So it obviously, maybe it's not going to be up to the second updated because Matt has a life. But he does a really good job of keeping it up to date, as up to date as possible. So we'll take a look at that. We're not going to hit on every team for the sake of time. I'm not talking about all 30 teams and their entire rotation for next season because we don't like to make 4-hour episodes. But we're going to take a look at some of the ones that I think are a little bit more interesting. But before I bring in Matt to do that, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball season in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news and scores, and even live in-game betting. From MLB to UFC to tennis to NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between the games, you can head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. And I just want to say that I have BetOnline pulled up right now. And if you own, obviously this is a basketball podcast, so maybe you're just more interested in NBA, don't even want to look at betting on other things. You can obviously bet on NBA futures at this point. You can bet on summer league games. They have it on BetOnline. Do I have any advice for how to bet on summer league games? No, but if you want to bet on summer league games, the lines are available. I haven't checked, but I'm sure that there is also live in-game betting for these summer league games. Do with that what you will. It is available for you at BetOnline. The game starts here. All right, and we have Matt Lawson here, and we're going to be going through, I think it's about 12 teams. Maybe we'll see if we'll talk about a couple others to talk about all the changes that have happened, talk about some of these rotations, players that we think are going to thrive this year, maybe a little bit more of a long-term projection for some of them where applicable. But before we do that, Matt, it's been about 2 weeks since we've talked. I think last time it was in between rounds 1 and 2 of the NBA draft. So obviously quite a few things have happened since then. What are your, I guess, one, how have you been? Because it's been 2 weeks instead of 1. And 2, what are your overall thoughts on all the change? We'll get into some of the specifics, but it's been a lot that's happened.
There has been, and I think I anticipated maybe even some bigger moves, but we've kind of had a slow drip of big moves. You know, there's been the Miles Turner, Milwaukee, Indiana fiasco, the Dame Lillard wave and stretch. We just had a trade yesterday with Norm Powell and John Collins. You know, obviously before the draft, we had Desmond Bane. Then shortly around there, we had Kevin Durant. So there's been, you know, the big moves with the Celtics as well. We've had a lot that's happened, but it's been stretched out over a few-week period. And what I think is really important is to try to now reassess where are all of these teams, because they're in much different places, many of them, than where we left them at the end of last season. But a lot of the opinions of the managers in your dynasty league are still stuck in what happened in the 24-25 season, even though we know every year things are going to dramatically shift. Players are going to get better or worse. Opportunities are going to change. Depth charts are different. And figuring out what changes are going to happen ahead of time. Having a strong opinion about where each team is headed in the upcoming season is one of the most important things to have as a dynasty manager, because you get to make the biggest value moves, the biggest value trades at this point of the year where there's this huge information gap, where people aren't seeing the slow drip of games every single day and getting the same box scores fed to them. We're getting this information based on projection, what we think about these players, what we know about them from the past, and it's not being force-fed to us by big platforms and media. You can figure it out, and that's what we're here to be able to help you do today.
100%. We'll go through, like I said, about 12 teams, but I think heading into this summer, this offseason, there was a lot of reports that this was going to be a wild offseason. There's going to be so many moves, so many trades, and while there's been a lot. And I think it almost feels a tad underwhelming, even though it hasn't been. And most of that is the reason I think for most of that is Luka Doncic got traded overnight on February 1st, whoever it was. And I think the feeling of waking up or staying up and seeing that trade almost like takes away from all these moves that have happened, because it's really been a lot, but nothing feels like that. So maybe we'll get another big trade like that. I mean, I don't think that everybody's like, okay, I guess Giannis is staying in Milwaukee. I'm sure everyone around the league is still saying, well, maybe something could change. We'll see. I don't think that you just make the moves you make unless you are expecting Giannis to be back, such as signing Miles Turner, getting rid of Damian Lillard. Not sure exactly if that keeps Giannis happy or not, but the Bucks are one of the teams we'll talk about, and we'll get into that. But we'll start with Boston, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up your spreadsheet that you've been keeping up to date so that anyone that's watching can get a visual on it. Right now, you have the starting lineup as Anthony Simons, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Sam Hauser, Nene Queta. The main question I have is who the heck is going to play center here? Because, I mean, Al Horford, I think, is still technically a free agent, but the expectation is basically that he's not going to be back in Boston. I mean, I'd be surprised if he signed back there. Luke Cornett signed in San Antonio. I think that one was a little bit more surprising to me. I was expecting maybe he's back to start at center, but now they added Luka Garza. I mean, Xavier Tillman's still there. They drafted Amari Williams. I don't feel great about any of those options. What's your take on how this Boston lineup is going to look?
What we've seen this offseason from Boston is that the priority was to be able to improve their tax situation. And they've certainly done that, being able to move on from both Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday in moves where they didn't really need to take on any bad future salary. And they were able to not have to pay assets to be able to get off of those two big contracts. That put them in a position now where their tax bill is significantly reduced. They could even get themselves even further out of the restrictions of the tax aprons with another move to be able to get off of a Sam Hauser or maybe moving Anthony Simons later on in the season. But the priority has not been trying to put together the best possible roster for this upcoming season with Jason Tatum out for the year. So what we're really left with here is the team that does not have a dependable option at center. The closest thing is Nene Queta, who they were comfortable with in games where they didn't have Porzingis, often where they didn't have Cornette. They would let Queta play, and he did have games where he played around 24 minutes. He is a big body. He's able to defend on the interior. He's able to protect the rim. He's a very traditional center in that regard, limited offensively, but obviously a really strong finisher at the rim. It is not the 5-out style that Joe Mazzulla prefers to be able to play. It is a more traditional look from a center. I would imagine that he will, at least at the start of the season, have the biggest share of the starting center pie or the center pie in Boston. But that could change as time goes on. And the reason is that there are other options, perhaps, that maybe fit into what this team will evolve into as the season is going on. We were talking about Luka Garza coming over for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He's more of a stretch big in the sense that he will put up threes. And we've seen him put up a pretty high volume of them in the last couple of seasons. The three-point shooting volume has been significant. He hasn't hit them at the rate that you would want from someone who's out there, but at least Joe Mazzulla is getting someone who's going to play in that 5-out style. He will also hit the offensive boards really hard. Defensively, it's likely to be a disaster with Luka Garza. He's just not able to move functionally. He's not big enough to be able to be a drop big. that he can't switch. There's not a lot that you can do with him. You can try to hide him, but I think it's going to be in limited minutes, and it's probably going to be based on the idea that they're going to be playing 5 out in those minutes with Garza, and hope that he's able to get enough offensive rebounds to be able to make up for the fact of what he's giving up on the other side as a defender. And then you have Xavier Tillman, who fell off almost entirely out of the rotation last season. He did have some credibility as a switch big in both Memphis and Boston, but has fallen out of favor because offensively he's just a zero. He's attempted to be able to stretch it out to 3 a little bit more last season. It didn't go in at all. Unless there's some dramatic development in Xavier Tillman being able to hit threes, it's unlikely that he's going to be able to stick in this rotation. And with him, he's an undersized center and he doesn't give you anything offensively. It's difficult to be able to play that guy at this time in the NBA. And then you have Amari Williams, who I think is likely to be on a 2-way contract with the Celtics, given the situation that they're currently in with their roster. He is a really big body, huge 7'6" wingspan, not the most athletic big, but a really good passer. Kentucky would often give him the ball up at the top of the key. He was able to find cutters from that position. Can drive a little bit, straight line drives, but the handle can get a little bit loose, but it's impressive for a center. The problem is he's not that athletic. While he's big, he's going to be able to finish if he has a clear path, but probably not through a lot of defenders. And you're not going to get, kind of that rim running element from him as much as you're just going to be able to get a guy who can help you as a playmaking hub up at the top and can finish some plays from the dunker spot. I don't know if it's going to be able to function in his rookie season. He is an older rookie, so it's possible he's a name to watch. If you're in a 30-team league, Amari Williams could be somebody to be able to add in your rookie draft later on. I think in the second round of a rookie draft, of the 30-team rookie draft, someone for watch lists for shallower leagues to be able to see if he can get a foothold in this rotation. But with all of these guys, there's limitations that are really going to prevent them from being a really big minute starter, with Queta being the most likely because of the comfort level that the Celtics have with him and his ability to be able to play functionally on defense.
Yeah, I think that's about where I feel. Amari Williams is a guy that I'm pretty excited to draft. Maybe I'm a touch higher. I have him still as a second round guy, but I believe somewhere a little early in the second round because of the opportunity. I think that there is a good bit of competition for minutes at center, and it's a pretty even competition because I don't think anybody really sticks out. So maybe it is a situation where he's able to step in, and maybe not immediately, but play a role, because I don't think, maybe he's not the best center option right now. There's nobody that I think is truly, definitely the guy. So maybe there's some minutes there. And like you mentioned, he is a good passer, so that could be an intriguing thing for fantasy. And then if things just go off the rails in Boston, with the way this lineup looks right now, I think that's probably a play-in team in the East. But maybe they get there and it's not quite going as well, and Anthony Simons has moved at the deadline because he maybe isn't part of their long-term plans. Maybe there's an injury to Derek White or Jaylen Brown. Things really go off the rails, and then they're like, okay, let's see what we have in this rookie. So I think things could change pretty quickly in Boston, just because this team does look quite different than it did last year. I feel obviously less confident that this team is going to be really, really good, even if they do have guys like Jaylen Brown, guys like Derek White. I don't know. It'll be an interesting season in Boston, definitely different from the last few. Taking a look at Brooklyn, who we have right next to them on this sheet. Jaeger Demon, Cam Thomas, Zaire Williams, Michael Porter Jr., who they got in the Cam Johnson deal from Denver, Nick Claxton. They have a number of different rookies or other recent first round or second round picks in this rotation potentially. Do we think this is just another bottom of the barrel season for Brooklyn, where they're going to be looking to add one of these top guys in the 2026 class? So, and then does that mean a lot of minutes for these young guys and potentially some breakout seasons?
Yeah, from the top, this team does not have the talent to be able to be even, I think, in the play-in conversation this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to be fair, they got everything they could out of last year's roster, and it pushed their lottery balls down to where they ended up in the pick that they did at number 8. But I think that what you're seeing here is that the Nets kind of kept almost everything that they had on last year's roster, even though they had the option to be able to move on from a lot of them. And even where they got rid of a player, they kind of did a one-for-one replacement with Cam Johnson and Michael Porter Jr. So functionally, what we have is last year's Nets roster with Cam Johnson being replaced by Michael Porter Jr., and we've got all of 5 first-round pick rookies coming in. And it's kind of creating a mess for fantasy basketball purposes. And I think we're going to see different phases of this Nets season. And that assumes that Cam Thomas comes back, which I think ultimately will be the result here, that he's in restricted free agency. There is not a market for him. It remains possible that some team would be able to try to move money to be able to bring him in. But I don't think that's what's going to happen here. I think he's going to probably end up on a short-term deal with the Nets, make some real money over the next couple of seasons, and something that they could functionally trade him off of in a future year, if not later this year. I think what we're going to get now is Jaeger Demons playing a big role because they made the big investment in him in the lottery to be able to take him. I think he's going to get the opportunity, like we talked about previously, to kind of play the role of what Josh Giddey did on those bad Oklahoma City Thunder teams when they were tanking. They just put it out there, played fast, and let Josh have the ball in his hands. I think that's what they're going to do with Jaeger Demon. The big swing skill for him is the shooting. If he's able to knock down shots the way that he apparently did in pre-draft workouts, you could have one of the more productive fantasy rookies this season. That's why I like him, because of that short-term value. There are questions long-term with Jaeger Demon. He's not particularly effective inside of the arc, or at least getting inside of the arc at this point. He needs a ball screen to be able to get downhill. He can finish at the rim if he's able to get there at a pretty good level, but we're going to need to see some development there to be able to feel strongly about him. And beyond that, you're going to get more Zaire Williams because he's able to stretch and play at least functionally defensively. It's not great, but he's able to shoot the three, able to have some size. He's going to be part of the rotation. They started him a lot last year. That might change at some point this season, but I think he'll be able to start early on. Michael Porter Jr. is going to go into a big minute role and probably a higher usage role than he did even previously in Denver, because he's not in Denver any longer. He's not behind Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. Nick Claxton will hopefully be able to be more like he was toward the end of last season, where the minutes had come back up and in the higher 20s. I think they're going to try to build up the value of Nick Claxton because that contract is not terribly movable right now. We're seeing starting centers around his level getting a lot less than the $25 million per year that Nick Claxton's going to be paid this season. So if they want to be able to move on from Nick Claxton and free up for what will be the next Brooklyn Nets team and their next starting center in the future, it's going to have to be rehabilitating the value of Nick Claxton. They bring Day'Ron Sharpe back on a reasonable contract, so he's part of the picture now. So that complicates things for Danny Wolf. Danny Wolf can play next to Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe because he can shoot the three, can handle the ball, he can play a different role offensively. And we saw him last year at Michigan play with Vlad Golden, a traditional 7-foot center, run pick and roll with a 7-foot center. You could see that in Brooklyn, and I think it would probably come at the expense of the Noah Clowney minutes. Clowney did not ultimately impress at the level that some of us hoped last season. He's gotten his three-point volume way up, but we saw kind of a regression in his ability to be able to play both as an interior defender and to be able to score at the rim last year. It's unclear where he's headed and where the organization sits on Noah Clowney, but that will be one of the places of opportunity for Danny Wolf to be able to get more minutes in this lineup and get a firm place in the rotation. And then when it comes to players like Ben Surratt, Drake Powell, and Nolan Traore, I think Nolan Traore is going to get the opportunity to be able to be in this rotation and be a backup point guard after playing professionally in France. He is probably some of the most pro ready of any of the rookies on this roster. Ben Surratt as well, playing in Germany, had the opportunity to play quite a bit last year for his team. Those guys are going to be in competition to be able to get those minutes, but it does mean that there's probably going to be an odd man out. I don't see Surratt having a huge role. I think Drake Powell is more of a developmental wing. It's possible that as we get into the back half of the season, he could see his opportunity and minutes rise, but not someone that I'm terribly interested in fantasy in the short or long term. But this is going to be a fluid situation where I think you are going to see a very large number of players cycling in and out of this rotation. It could change night to night based on matchups. And it's going to be a difficult situation to be able to pin down. We're going to need to pay close attention in the preseason, just like we did for the Washington Wizards last year. The Wizards made it very obvious right away that they were going to play Keyshawn George in a really big role in the preseason. That carried into the regular season. We will get to see who the favorites are in this Brooklyn Nets lineup early on, and we should be ready to pounce on that once we get that information, once preseason and training camp news start to trickle in.
Yeah, adding in 5 rookies and not making too many other dramatic changes to your rotation definitely mucks things up. It makes it pretty difficult for anyone to solidify themselves as playing heavy minutes. I mean, we expect Claxton, Michael Porter Jr., Cam Thomas to all play significant minutes, assuming Cam Thomas is back and nothing changes on that front. But definitely going to be a pretty interesting rotation to keep an eye on. Some of the other teams, I think it's about 2 in each division, but the next team that I want to talk about is the Indiana Pacers, who obviously we know Tyrese Halliburton suffered the injury that's going to keep him out for all of next season. That was confirmed yesterday by the team. And then I think in what was one of the more surprising things, Miles Turner left for Milwaukee. So we'll talk about both of those teams, but I remember waking up reading the notification. Oh, okay, Miles Turner got a 4-year extension with Indiana. That's cool that he's back. And then I had to go reread it to see that he actually had left because it was just so surprising to me. But with the way that the money works out, obviously that makes a little bit of sense. But now we're looking at a situation in Indiana where you have Andrew Nembhard probably starting at point guard, TJ McConnell probably playing a lot of minutes at point guard. And then at center, we're probably looking at Jay Huff as the starting center. I believe there was a report that they were about to sign either James Wiseman or Isaiah Jackson back. Assuming both of them are back, we'll keep an eye on that. But again, a pretty similar situation to Boston, where like maybe a little bit better than Boston, but nobody that's truly okay. Like this is the starting center. Even if I probably, and you do as well, feel best about Jay Huff being the guy, but there's still going to be an opportunity for a guy like Isaiah Jackson or a guy like James Wiseman, assuming they're both back and fully healthy, ready to start.
Yeah, it's a strange situation for multiple reasons. Let's first address what's likely to be the fallout from Tyrese Halliburton being out for the entire season. We're going to get more Andrew Nembhard. He's going to have the ball in his hands significantly more. It's going to create fantasy opportunity for him more so than what we usually see. So that could be a boost for him. We've seen that in some stretches, not always, but when he's been fully healthy and he's gotten the ball more, he has been able to produce more in fantasy. I could see that happening this season. It creates more solidified roles for Benedict Mathurin, Aaron Nesmith, and there's going to be a huge offensive load that's going to be put on Pascal Siakam. He is going to need to score a significant amount more than usual to be able to make up for the fact that Tyrese Halliburton is not around. He's going to have the ball in his hands more as a result of Tyrese Halliburton not being around. TJ McConnell kind of tops out in minutes in the low 20s just for the way that he plays. It's difficult to be able to constantly be driving, constantly be pushing the pace the way that McConnell does for many more minutes than that. But you know, when he gets into the game, he is going to be in the spotlight, having the ball, and everything will be about TJ McConnell when TJ McConnell enters the game. That's how he plays. And then you're going to get the opportunity for Jarris Walker and Obi Toppin to be able to kind of play up in the lineup a little bit to make up for the fact that there isn't really the strong starting center option that this team has been used to having in the form of Miles Turner for so long. So you will likely get some Obi Toppin, Pascal Siakam front court minutes together. Jarris Walker could also get the opportunity to be able to do that because you're going to be relying on kind of a wide cast of potential options at center. Jay Huff, probably the most reliable and easiest one-for-one fit for replacing Miles Turner in that he can stretch the court a little bit and shoot from three. He can protect the rim as well. So he's at least of that kind of similar archetype to Miles Turner, just not as good of a version of it. But you could see a comfort level with being able to put Huff out there. After that, we have to remember that within about 10 days of each other, Isaiah Jackson and James Wiseman tore their Achilles tendons. So they are going to be at the start of the season less than 1 year out from that recovery. That is normally longer than a 1 year recovery. Now, it is possible that one or both of them is ready to go. Isaiah Jackson is still a restricted free agent. We need to see how that resolves. I think he will be back on this team. And then you have Tony Bradley. You have the possibility of Thomas Bryant being brought back in some capacity. There are other options here, but they're limited minute options. So I think it's going to need to come from Jay Huff, at least at the start of the year. If you don't have Isaiah Jackson or James Wiseman, it's probably just going to be some combination of Jay Huff and Tony Bradley. It's going to be having some small ball 5 minutes from Obi Toppin and Pascal Siakam, and Jarris Walker potentially fitting into that. It's going to be an experimental situation, a lab that you're going to be seeing Rick Carlisle run to be able to figure out how he can fit these pieces together in the regular season in a way that keeps this team afloat. Because I don't think they're just going to throw away the season until it just becomes clear that it's not going to work out. That's not usually the way the Rick Carlisle is wired. And I think there's enough pride in what this team is to try to keep it going through the season, at least until it becomes abundantly clear that they're not going to be able to. So the early portion of the season, they're going to put their best foot forward in an attempt to be able to put a functional team out there.
Yeah, obviously it's going to be very different expectations, but I agree with you. I don't think that this is now all of a sudden a team that's going to be in competition for one of the top three prospects in the 2026 class that they're just going to throw at the towel in the season. Like you can run lineups with Siakam at the 5 for long stretches and have a lot of success with either Obi Toppin or Jarris Walker in there. So if the Jay Huff thing doesn't work out the way that maybe we're being overly optimistic about, maybe we're tempering our expectations a little bit, but that could work out. I still think that this is at least a play-in team in the East. So, I mean, Andrew Nembhard's a really solid player, and maybe we'll get to see him in a higher usage role than we have in the past. I'm hoping that Jarris Walker is able to play a larger role this year because it's been kind of frustrating to have him sit the bench for most of his first 2 seasons and then get some flashes here and there. So hopefully a larger role for him will lead to a breakout year. Moving on to Milwaukee with Miles Turner signing there, which I think is a really, really, really good fit next to Giannis. It's just an upgraded version of Brook Lopez, a shot blocking, floor spacing big that doesn't rebound all that well, a younger, better version. But I look at the rest of this roster and I say, why the heck would Giannis want to stay here? Like, I mean, it could be a loyalty thing. It could be just, he feels comfortable there. But if he's serious about wanting to win another championship, it makes me question why he would want to stay here with the way that this roster is currently constructed, even if there are some players to like here. So I'm not ready to say that, yeah, this is definitely going to be a team that has Giannis on here. But with the way it currently is, there's no imminent trade. There's no rumors or reasons to think that, yeah, Giannis is going to be off this roster within the next 2 weeks, but things can happen quickly. What do you make of kind of this Milwaukee lineup with the way it currently is constructed?
I think that Milwaukee made an attempt here to be able to appease Giannis, to be able to put the best foot forward that it could to be able to create a viable team for the 25-26 season. And I don't think they fully succeeded in that. I think that Miles Turner is a really good fit next to Giannis Antetokounmpo, but the lack of guard play on this team without Damian Lillard is pretty shocking to be able to look at. And we saw what that looked like once Lillard went down with the torn Achilles in the playoffs against the Pacers. It was a lot of Kevin Porter Jr. And in the regular season, when Dame was out with the deep vein thrombosis in his leg, we saw that the starting lineup was what I have projected here. Ryan Rollins starting at point guard, Taurean Prince, Kyle Kuzma, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Miles Turner, kind of making a supersized lineup around Ryan Rollins. And you can see that being what Doc Rivers goes to, but it's going to require a heavy dose of Kevin Porter Jr. off the bench, who actually I projected to be able to play more minutes than Ryan Rollins this season, because the non-Giannis minutes are going to need to be the Kevin Porter Jr. show, because there is no one else on this roster, kind of save of Bobby Portis, who can create their own offense, and they're going to need someone to be able to handle the ball, create advantage, create for others, create for themselves, create their own shots, because otherwise it is a complement of kind of mediocre role players, whether you're talking about, some solid shooting from AJ Green and Gary Trent Jr., Gary Harris coming in as a nominal two-way player who can only play so many minutes before he inevitably is on the shelf. And then, kind of the cast on the deep bench of guys who they're just never really that comfortable in playing extended minutes, between Andre Jackson Jr. and Tyler Smith, who maybe could emerge more this season, but we don't know if Doc Rivers is going to have a comfort level playing them. He hasn't so far. And I think Jericho Sims can play limited minutes as an explosive center option, but it's going to be limited because we know what the Jericho Sims experience looks like. So overall, I'm not inspired by this roster. Any team with Giannis is going to, in the East especially, is going to be somewhat competitive. And I do think that if they're healthy, they can stay afloat to be able to at least be a play-in team. But there's not upside with this roster. We saw what that looked like last year, and I think there is an upgrade over what Brook Lopez kind of was by the end of last year to what Miles Turner is now. But there isn't enough improvement otherwise on this roster to be able to view them as a serious contender. For fantasy, there is opportunity with Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins because there is so little else as far as guards on this team. They both will have opportunity to be able to seize big roles, play 30-plus minutes. That is possible in those outcomes for both of them, and both of them, even in more standard dynasty leagues, could either be available or easily gettable in trade. That's a consideration. And you're expecting a huge season from Giannis here. If you have Giannis, you are going to be able to get everything from Giannis in this season. He's going to have the ball in his hands constantly. He's going to be driving through walls at the rim constantly. This is going to be the full Giannis Antetokounmpo show, even more than we've seen in prior seasons.
Yeah, I think that's part of what concerns me with some of the other players on this team is the fact that it is going to be the Giannis show and he is going to have the ball in his hands basically the entire time. So even if it seems like on paper, maybe, when he's off the floor, obviously somebody's going to have to shoot the ball and have the ball in their hands. But maybe Ryan Rollins spends all of his time on the floor with Giannis and then he just doesn't necessarily get the opportunity, even if he does see the increase in minutes. I think that if there is a Giannis trade, and obviously that would shake up this lineup and roster dramatically, then maybe there would be more opportunities for some of these guys. But with the way it currently sits, even if there is minutes for some of them, I'm not super optimistic that we're going to see really strong seasons out of them or better, honestly, better seasons that we've seen in the past. Moving on, keeping on going through the East, going to the Charlotte Hornets. They obviously drafted Kunkanipple, who we were kind of expecting to be taken by them to fill out a really strong starting lineup. And then shortly after they took him, they traded Mark Williams. And now they have, they got a little bit less than what they would have gotten in that rescinded Lakers deal for him. The 2029 least favorable pick between a bunch of good teams, the 29th overall pick, and then Micic, who they bought out or traded again, and then he got bought out. So now they have Mason Plumlee, they have Moussa Diabate, they drafted Ryan Kalkbrenner. Excited about that one, but the rest of this rotation, I also think that it's a little bit better than it has been in the past. They added Colin Sexton, they added Spencer Dinwiddie, they added insurance basically that if LaMelo Ball does get hurt, this team isn't going to be just abysmal. Well, LaMelo wasn't hurt again. I guess we're back in the lottery. This team should still be able to be pretty competitive in a weaker Eastern Conference, even if LaMelo misses time, which I think is a great decision by management. Surprised they hadn't really done that in the past. But now the center spot, I think, is where we're looking at for potential fantasy opportunity. You have Mason Plumlee starting now, but only at 20 minutes per game. So maybe not playing this massive starters role. And there's going to be opportunities for all three guys. How do you feel about how this center rotation could play out?
It's ugly. And I think anytime Mason Plumlee is involved in the equation, and we saw this last year in Phoenix, he can play about 18 minutes a night, and they're not going to be good minutes. I don't have Mason Plumlee projected as a starter because I have any kind of confidence in him. I think he's fairly washed. But the reality is that for what I think they'll start the season with, they're probably going to put him out there just to be able to kind of be the outline of a functional center who has played long enough in the league to basically understand how to play the position. Moussa Diabate, despite getting some more extended minutes last season, still never really started for the Hornets throughout their run, even when they had players going down. He is at least a little bit undersized for the position. Teams usually like to start bigger, but I think he'll have a significant role off of the bench. He's going to be in the center rotation all season. He gives them an energy level that I think will fit well with what they're developing on this roster. And I like Moussa Diabate long-term as a kind of rotation big and a guy who can bring energy off of the bench. Ryan Kalkbrenner is really where it gets interesting here. And I could fully see after the Mason Plumlee experience goes exactly how the Mason Plumlee experience goes, that Ryan Kalkbrenner gets the opportunity to be able to expand into a starting role or at least a really big role off of the bench. And here's the reality with Ryan Kalkbrenner. I'm not going to try to oversell you on the idea of him being a long-term starting center in the NBA because I don't think that's ultimately what he is. Everything that he does pretty well. The one elite thing that he does is that he's an elite rim protector. And he proved that at Creighton across 5 seasons. He is going to be able to protect the rim. He's going to be able to do it at a high level. He's massive. The problem is he's not that strong. He's not that athletic. His offensive game is fairly limited. There's not a whole lot that he can do on that end. And you're kind of left with a guy who can be a drop big, who can protect the rim really well. If he gets out into space in matchups, if you're playing a team that goes 5 out, he's not going to play a lot that night. He's not going to be able to do it. So this is going to be very matchup based. There's going to be games where Diabate is probably going to be the better option to be able to have out there a little bit more. There's going to be games where Kalkbrenner makes a little bit more sense. I like Kalkbrenner once we get into the later teens and rookie drafts in dynasty leagues because there's going to be opportunity here. And he really could cement himself now that he has a guaranteed contract as a second-round pick. He's got the opportunity to be able to be a part of this Hornets rotation for the long term. He could be someone that they have as part of their center rotation for a number of years into the future. And that's a really important thing when considering about this. What is the contract status of some of these second-round players? If you look now, because of the second-round pick exception included in this new CBA, teams are able to sign sign these players for 3 or 4 year guaranteed deals in the second round without the tax implications that you would normally have from adding that kind of salary. And a lot of teams are looking to be able to do that. So you're seeing picks 30 through at least 40, sometimes into 45, and then a few players scattered near the back end of the second round, like a Tyrese Proctor, whose agents are telling them, don't take me. I've got a guaranteed deal at the end of the draft, so don't take me early on. I'm not taking a two-way deal. That's what Proctor did. He was able to get there. We saw that with Trace Jackson Davis and the Warriors before. So be on the lookout for that news to be able to see who is getting signed. That's something that I do in my rookie rankings, to be able to show contract status, because it really is a tip-off to be able to say this team values this guy. Jalen Wells was taken near the back end of the second round last year, but we knew that he was valued much more by the Grizzlies than that, because he signed a guaranteed deal before Summer League. That is the tip-off of, hey, there might be something here. And we knew that with Wells early on because of that. Kalkbrenner is one of those guys who got that guaranteed deal. That gives a much more comfort level than a two-way contract where you're limited in the number of games that you can even play for the NBA roster, and it's a totally non-guaranteed contract that they can get rid of any time. The vast majority of two-way players do not end up on guaranteed contracts later on. So if you're investing a big rookie pick into a two-way player, you are probably taking a huge risk that they're going to be able to get converted later on. Most of them do not. And that's why I have a comfort level with Kalkbrenner. Otherwise, the only other note that I have on this Hornets roster is that it's possible Con Knippel starts. I think he's a good fit with LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller because he can impact the game without the ball in his hands. It is also possible that they start Colin Sexton, and they could put him out there as well. I think it makes a little bit more sense to have him off of the bench, but they now have Trey Mann back as well, who can play that role. So it's complicated, and there are going to be more changes on this Hornets roster because, as I calculated, they have 17 players on guaranteed contracts. You can only have 15. So they're going to need to be able to move some players out of here as well. I don't know how that's going to happen, what that's going to look like. Grant Williams' knee was absolutely destroyed. He had meniscus injuries, multiple ligament tears, but he makes $13.6 million. So it's going to be difficult for them to be able to move off him, and I don't know if we're going to see him this year. Maybe they give up on the Nick Smith Jr. experience. Maybe they pay to have somebody take Pat Connaughton off of their hands after they just got paid to take him from Milwaukee. It's unclear at this point, but they're going to need to make more moves. So be on the lookout for that. The Hornets are not done here. And what they do could possibly involve bringing another center into the equation. So that's something to take into consideration when you're investing in any of these players.
Yeah, 100%. I think just the fact that Mason Plumlee is in consideration for the starting spot, that any move they make, they definitely could be looking to bring in somebody else, another body to play center that maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But with Kalkbrenner, I've been saying the same thing about this isn't a long-term play. It could be that he has a really strong rookie season and they still draft a center next year because they don't feel like he is a long-term play. But if he's playing 25 minutes per game, even 20 minutes per game, he can block 2.5 shots. So maybe that it does hold some level of value to where you would take him pretty early in a rookie draft. And then the guaranteed contract call out was very valuable and insightful to hear about Jalen Wells as well. So it gives us a really good comparison to look at. Staying in the same division right now, moving over to Washington, this is a pretty interesting team they have here because there are so many recent first-round picks just over the last 2 drafts. I think they added someone else, I believe, that was a first-rounder from last year. So they have like 5 players from that class and then a few more from this past one. But they also have a team full of veterans that if you would have had these guys in like 2020, 2021, it probably would have be in consideration for a playoff team. So there's a lot of interesting things here, a couple reclamation projects that maybe they're looking to eventually flip for draft picks after kind of allowing these guys to be just veteran presence in the locker room to help the young players develop. But it makes it pretty interesting for fantasy basketball because we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. So what's your take on this just massive list of players that could play in Washington?
I think there are going to be 2 seasons in Washington. There's going to be the start of the season where there's going to be putting out CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton, having Marcus Smart come off of the bench, and Kelly Olynyk in there as the backup center. There's going to be an attempt to be able to put out that team and give those older veterans an opportunity to be able to show their value And then there's going to be the point in the season where Washington says, thank you very much, gentlemen. Here's your gold watch. You're not going to be playing anymore. Some of you are going to be traded. We're going to be dumping off of your salaries at the end of this season anyway. We do not need your services anymore. And then the kids are going to get to play. In the meantime, you're still going to get a big role, big minutes from Bilal Coulibaly and Alex Sarr. I think Trey Johnson is going to get prioritized in the rotation. He might start. I haven't projected to, but that's not a guarantee. They did go with a lineup that, with Marcus Smart on the bench, Chris Middleton in the starting lineup once those two were brought over last year. I think that's what it's likely going to look like. I think Middleton, he's going to play limited minutes because that's all he's capable of at this point without his knees exploding. But I think he's going to get a starting opportunity. And you're going to have a Sarr start. You're going to have McCollum start. Coulibaly is going to start. Those are pretty much locked in. The bench is where it gets really interesting because we know they like Keyshawn George. They want to play him. But he's going to be a little bit blocked early on. He's still going to play quite a bit. I think he's going to play every night, but the minutes are not going to be where they were last year. Bub Carrington, I think there'll be an attempt to be able to get him out there as much as possible, but bringing in McCollum, it didn't clear up the opportunity that we hoped when Jordan Poole was moved off of this roster, at least in the short term, but that could be coming. I don't think there's going to be priority placed on Marcus Smart playing on this team quite a bit. There wasn't when they brought him over. I think if they had an opportunity to move him, they would, but making $21.6 million this year, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to move off of him until at the very least later in the season as an expiring deal. And then you get into the really interesting question of, is this current Wizards administration going to continue to invest in Corey Kispert? Is that someone that they look to move off of? He could have some value. He's on, a reasonable mid-level contract, and he can shoot. He is a good functional role player in the NBA, but he's blocking the opportunity of someone like Cam Whitmore, who they might want to be able to take a look at. I don't know. I would like to think that Cam getting traded to this team is going to create instant big opportunity for him. I don't see how that's happening at the start of the season. I think the second half of the season, yes, we could get Cam Whitmore time, but we need to remember that there's still going to be priority placed on Trey Johnson, who they just invested a top pick in over Cam Whitmore, who they only needed to trade a couple of second-round picks to be able to get. There's going to be a prioritization of Bilal Coulibaly when he's available and his development. So when you bring Cam Whitmore into the lineup, it becomes all about Cam Whitmore. And unless there's a change in the way that he plays, that's going to probably limit his role on this team because there are higher priorities than Cam Whitmore on this roster. So I don't want to be the wet blanket, but I think we need to pump the brakes on the idea of, okay, Cam has been unleashed. It's time for Cam Whitmore to break out. That could happen, but I think it's going to be a slow process. I don't think it's going to be immediately at the start of the season, and it could be dependent on some other players not being available for him to be able to get that kind of like big starting opportunity that I know people who roster Cam Whitmore are hoping for him to be able to get in Washington.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit lower on Cam Whitmore just in general, just because of the reason you said of when he's on the floor, it's the Cam Whitmore show. That's just the way he plays. It's the way it is. And there's so many guys to like in Washington. In the short term, in the long term, the player I'd mentioned earlier with the fifth 2024 draft pick from the first round they had was Dylan Jones, who they OKC just had to basically offload because they had too many talented players on their roster. But he was also really good when he got the opportunity in OKC. So, how does he fit in as well? So, Washington now all of a sudden has this. I mean, it's a bad issue to have, but it's who do they prioritize minutes for? There's going to be one or two exciting young players that just aren't able to get minutes in Washington when Washington's goal is also to add another top pick in 2026. So things are getting really competitive really quickly in Washington. It's kind of what we saw over the last couple of years with OKC, with they all of a sudden just having this roster loaded with young talent to the point where it was there were players that we liked that were not sure they were going to make the roster, be able to crack the rotation at all. So it's a good strategy for Washington to have because it makes everybody a little bit better, but it does make it not quite what we're expecting from a rebuilding team where it's okay, now this young player that we like goes to a rebuilding team and all of a sudden, bam, they're getting a lot of minutes. Maybe it would have happened in Brooklyn, but it's not happening in Washington. Moving on to the West to talk about Dallas, who I was pretty excited. I think that we talked about this, the opportunity for Cooper Flagg to basically be a point guard. And I think we're going to get to see that in Summer League. Jason Kidd has already said that. But now they signed D'Angelo Russell. And no, you don't say, oh, okay, dang, Cooper Flag is not going to have the ball in his hands at all because they added in D'Angelo Russell to run the offense. Like, Cooper Flag's still going to get the opportunity to probably play some minutes at point guard, but really just to be able to play make for stretches, even if he's not a traditional point guard at all. But what do we make of this rotation? Are we excited about D'Angelo Russell now, the opportunity for him to enter into a starting role alongside a really talented roster with some really good defenders that can make up for his, I guess, lack of defensive prowess, and the fact that there isn't really too many other point guard options? I mean, you have Brandon Williams. I suppose you also have Dante Exum, but what do we make of this rotation?
Yeah, I think that D'Angelo Russell, once again, is kind of just a placeholder on this roster, which is kind of seems to be the role that he's fit in ever since he got traded to the Warriors in the Kevin Durant sign and trade, where he's just kind of filling space, filling usage, filling a role until the better option comes along, until they can move on from him. And that's exactly what this is. I mean, they're waiting on Kyrie Irving's availability. And I think that the reality here is the priority is going to be placed on seeing what Cooper Flag can do on the ball early on in this season. He was given the keys last year at Duke to be able to do that earlier than people anticipated and to a larger degree than people anticipated, and he ran with it. And by the end of the season, he was a really significant three-level scorer in a way that I don't think anybody anticipated, a playmaker at a level that I don't think anyone really anticipated. There was the idea that that could come for Cooper Flag at some point, but it came already as an 18-year-old playing for Duke. I think they're going to be able to test the limits of that early on for lack of other options, because we know the limitations of what an offense that goes through D'Angelo Russell looks like. That's not going to be what they're going to want to prioritize, to the extent that they can avoid it. I think that he's at least helpful in the sense that he's going to be able to space the ball. He's going to be able to get up a good volume of threes. That's going to help this offense work. It's going to open things up for Flag, especially when he has the ball. And it's going to be a transition when hopefully they can get Kyrie Irving. I'm not projecting Kyrie Irving right now in this lineup because I'm still skeptical of the idea that they're just going to be able to get him back within 11 or 12 months of him tearing his ACL. It's possible, but we've seen with players like Jamal Murray that that's not an automatic, that you're just able to be able to feel your best coming back from an ACL tear within less than a year and be able to play at the level that you need to, or that you're used to being able to play. So maybe he comes back, maybe it's in more limited capacity. It might be outside of the period of fantasy relevance for us this season. So if you roster Kyrie Irving, or if you're planning to, I would not be banking on him being able to contribute for you down the stretch, or even necessarily in the fantasy playoffs. What I'm interested in with this team is that there's just kind of a glut when it comes to front court options for them. And I don't know how that's going to play out. I think there's opportunity for them, and what they need to be focused on is figuring out who are going to be the guards of the future of this team, who are going to be part of that core with Cooper Flag and Derek Lively in the post Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis world. And right now they don't have that. I like Brandon Williams. I think he can stick in the NBA as an NBA player, as a rotation guard. But they need to be able to figure out what that next place is after Klay Thompson is gone. D'Angelo Russell is going to be a one and done on this team. Kyrie Irving's got probably 2 or 3 more years left of the prime of his career. And I'm going to be interested to see, do they move a PJ Washington? Do they, look to be able to move Daniel Gafford to be able to find something that fits for them long-term in the guard room on this roster? But otherwise, this is wheels up for a huge rookie season for Cooper Flag. That's the biggest headline that I take out of projecting this lineup. Cooper Flag is going to get all he can eat opportunity on this team. And I really like him to be a big first-year fantasy player, the likes of which we rarely see now.
Yeah, I think I've been a little overly optimistic about some of the return timelines for some of these players that got hurt last season. Both Kyrie Irving and DeJounte Murray have been 2 of the prime examples that I've just been expecting to be back earlier than they might be. But with Kyrie Irving saying he has to be 150,000% better and healthy for him to play next year, I think that, yeah, maybe it's going to take a little bit more time because that is definitely very, very healthy. But it'll be good if he's 150%, 150,000% better. That would be pretty impressive for him to do. Taking a look at Denver, not too much is dramatically different, but the main thing here is that they traded MPJ for Cam Johnson, and they've got Bruce Brown back, and they also did add Tim Hardaway Jr., Jonas Valanciunas as a better backup center than they've had in a very long time for Jokic. I don't remember the exact year that they had maybe a comparable backup center, but that's definitely been an issue of recent years. I had someone ask me about how adding Cam Johnson and Bruce Brown impacts Christian Brown after he had a really, really strong season this past year. And I see that you have him projected at 34 minutes or around there. I think he was at 33.9 last season. Do you see those additions maybe impacting him at all or resulting in a loss of minutes for him?
I don't, and here's why. I think he plays a very important role for them defensively that is not really going to be fully made up for by anyone that they brought in. Cam Johnson is kind of a neutral defender at times, can be a little bit lower than that, but I think he'll be fine on that end. But he's certainly not someone that you're going to be able to say, you're our perimeter stopper. That's what Christian Brown is able to do on this team. That's why he played the significant minutes that he did, because he can play that role defensively, and offensively, he can, have that mind meld with Nikola Jokic, be able to cut to the rim, get out in transition. He knows how he fits in on this team, and I think he's only going to improve from there. Bringing in Bruce Brown is an opportunity to be able to basically fill in almost every bench role that they need him to fill on any given night. He can do it all in this offense. We know that. Now, this is not the same level of Bruce Brown that we saw a couple of years ago on the NBA champion Denver Nuggets. He is not quite that player, but he's probably going to look a little bit closer to it, being back in the orbit of Nikola Jokic, which tends to rise all tides of players. We've seen a lot of guys look a lot better playing next to Nikola Jokic compared to how they look when they move on somewhere else. We saw it with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope last year. We saw it with Bruce Brown for the last couple of seasons. You just don't look as good without Nikola Jokic passing you the ball. And I think that this is going to be a revitalization for Bruce Brown. I've got him projected for 24 minutes coming off of the bench. He can be the backup point guard if they need to. He can replace the Christian Brown minutes and do what Christian Brown does when Brown needs to be able to sit on the bench and get rest. There's an opportunity for him to be able to fill a lot of different spaces on this team, and I think he'll kind of be prioritized as the lead bench player because of that. And this is just a far more talented team than it was in the previous season. They did a nice job filling in those gaps. I think we could see improvement from Julian Strawther, who's shown flashes as kind of a strong catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. Tim Hardaway Jr., when he's on, it works. When it doesn't, sit him down. It's basically, is the microwave scoring going to be there that night? Is he hitting shots? Then keep him in there. If not, they have the opportunity now to be able to not have to play him in a big role. We hope to continue to be able to see progression with Peyton Watson. I think he'll still have a place in this rotation. And like you said, Jonas Valanciunas is a huge improvement at the backup center spots. I'm looking forward to, and I hope that he does end up sticking the potential for him to be able to go to Greece, that doesn't come to fruition. It sounds like Denver is going to hold the line on that, because I'd like to be able to see him out there. And then you have all these young guys that Calvin Booth got fired for drafting. And I think that there could be opportunity for some of them. Jalen Pickett actually did get into the rotation near the end of last season. I think now it would take injury for him to be able to get a nightly spot in the rotation, but he looked at least functional as an NBA guard at points last season, which was a big improvement. And the guy that I want to highlight as like your stash watch list, depending on the size of your league, Deron Holmes. There is an immediate opportunity here. He was their first-round pick last year, and like most players in the NBA seemingly last year, he tore his Achilles. And he did that in Summer League. He presumably is going to be back and able to play early on this season because of how long ago that happened. We're talking about a year ago already, so we still got some rehabilitation time before we come into the season. Deron Holmes was one of those players whose fantasy stats set just popped when you did the projections for rookie drafts last year. I loved him. Some ability to be able to stretch the floor. He does the big man things as well. He's a guy who could fit next to Nikola Jokic in a few minutes. He can be the idea of what they wanted from Zeke Naji, and on top of actually potentially being a backup center behind Nikola Jokic in the future once Valanciunas moves off of this team. So there's a lot of long-term potential with Deron Holmes in fantasy, and a guy who's probably not going to get early opportunity because they're bringing in Valanciunas, because he's coming off of the Achilles tear. But keep your eye on him. And if anyone gets impatient, if he's already rostered in your league, if it's that level of league where there's that many players rostered, where someone held on to Holmes for this whole time, you might be able to apply him away. And I think there's going to be real opportunity for him in the future. That's a name to be able to watch out for.
100% a great player stash there. Will be interesting in Denver to see. I mean, I feel like it's already, like you said, a much better, a much deeper team than it was last year. I feel like that was their main issue, is that you felt like there was, I mean, at times in the playoffs with Michael Porter Jr. being hurt and Russell Westbrook being hurt as well. I think he was also hurt in the playoffs. It felt like there was like 4 healthy players that they could rely on. And now assuming health, you feel like this team is a lot deeper. Bruce Brown did play much better next to Jokic, so maybe putting it back there, we can see him get back to playing at that level, which helped them win a championship a couple years ago. Moving on, but staying in the division, heading over to Portland, you have Scoot Henderson, Toumani Camara, Denny Avdia, Jeremy Grant, Donovan Clingan as the starters, with Drew Holiday, Shaedon Sharpe off the bench, Robert Williams off the bench. I'm interested to see exactly who ends up starting for this team, because I would love to see Scoot start. I would love to see pretty much this lineup, but instead of Jeremy Grant, see Shaedon Sharpe start. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. How do you kind of feel about this? What gives you confidence that Scoot's definitely going to start over Drew Holiday, or that Shaedon Sharpe's going to come off the bench? Things like that.
I would say the only thing that I have confidence in this starting lineup is that Toumani Camara is going to start and Donovan Clingan is going to start. I think those two things are based on with Camara, what we saw last year. He always started. He plays a massively important defensive role for this team. Billups is going to start him. And Donovan Clingan is going to start because Robert Williams is not going to be available enough to be able to start consistently. And Hansen Yang is not going to be able to be in a position to be able to start immediately. And I like Donovan Clingan. They were much better defensively than Donovan Clingan when Donovan Clingan was on the court last year. It was a big part of why they had such a strong second half in Portland last year. If you have Donovan Clingan, if you drafted him in rookie drafts last year, if you're thinking about drafting him in redraft this year, this is a big opportunity for Donovan Clingan. I think he's going to be able to play as many minutes as he is capable of playing. And that's really the only limitation that I think we have this season on him. Can he progress up to big minutes? I've got him projected at 28. That would be a big leap, even from when he started last year, of how many minutes that he started in a lot of his starts. So I think that's what I feel confident in. Beyond that, maybe they don't start Scoot Henderson. I think his minutes are going to be in the low 30s regardless. I think it's time. And I think that they will ultimately, if it's not right at the beginning of the season, they're eventually going to lock into Scoot Henderson being the starting point guard for this team, because they're going to need that offensive creation in this lineup. It's not going to come from Drew Holiday. It can come from some degree from Shaedon Sharpe, but the creating for others, the playmaking, that isn't going to come to the same degree. So I think they need Scoot out there for a lot of minutes on this team now without Anthony Simons around and the limited playmaking that he was able to bring to the table. There is a real playmaking deficit beyond a Denny Avdia in this lineup, and that's why I have Avdia in there as well. But I don't feel entirely confident that he will start. We did see moments last year where he didn't. I still think he'll play a significant role, even if he did come off of the bench. And I agree. I would prefer if Jeremy Grant did not start at this point. I don't think he is necessarily a locked-in NBA starter. He's not a locked-in NBA starter at this point. He wouldn't be on many teams. But the financial commitment to him, and I'm guessing the likelihood that they want to be able to get his value to the point that some team will take him for neutral value at best. Maybe that they won't have to pay that much to get off of his contract in the offseason. That might be the hope. And we will see. But at the very least, what we know is that Jeremy Grant will not play basketball in the spring. Once the groundhog does or does not show his shadow, Jeremy Grant is going to stop playing basketball. That is a fact that we have seen over his career, over the past stretch between the Pistons and the Trailblazers. We're getting half a season at most from Jeremy Grant. So eventually you're going to be able to get the guys that you want to see in this lineup. And with Drew Holiday, we already saw them be able to rescind some of the value that they sent back in that trade. It was just ended up being a 1-for-1 player swap for Anthony Simons and Drew Holiday in Boston. And there was some news that it was related to injury issues with Holiday in the physical. I think that is a real consideration here, and why I wouldn't necessarily project him to be playing big starting minutes. I think there's going to be an attempt to be able to preserve him and maybe be a little bit more careful with his minutes to make sure that he does have availability throughout this season. That's why I could see him coming off of the bench. And then you need someone to be able to create offense off of the bench as well. That's the idea of having Shaedon Sharpe there, but I think he will continue to play 30-plus minutes a night. This is going to be a really fluid situation. There's obviously still remnants of what they did initially. The Joe Cronin decision to be able to put this roster together the way that they did, bringing in some of these veteran players. I think that there's going to be changes as it goes on, but they're clearly in a mode to try to win this year, get into the play-in. That seems to be the goal here. They're trying to build up the value of this franchise since it is up for sale. That was part of the Yang selection in the draft, I think, to be able to not only get a player that they like, but also a player who could be extremely lucrative for the value of the franchise, as we have seen with the value that was increased of the Houston Rockets when Yao Ming was part of that franchise. There could be that opportunity for them. That is likely part of the consideration for a team that is for sale at this moment. You're seeing huge sticker prices go for NBA franchises, and I'm guessing they're hoping to be able to get that big sticker price before expansion goes into play in the coming off seasons.
Yeah, I think, another reason that you would probably want to start Jeremy Grant is that you don't want $64 million or be paying $64 million between Grant and Holiday for two reserves. And I think the last time Jeremy Grant played a basketball game in April was the 2020-2021 season, which was the year that they delayed the start. So I think that the regular season went into May. So, I mean, he did play in May that year as well. So to his credit, it wasn't like he played in April, but not May. But yeah, it's been a little while since we've seen him play at the end of the season. Hopefully they're able to keep Drew Holiday healthy, because I think that if they are hoping to at least play postseason basketball this year, and it's going to be very tough to do in the West, but if they're able to, having Drew Holiday there will be pretty helpful. Moving on to Utah, another team that has outwardly said that they're going to try and compete this year. And I think that the moves they've made since they said that do not back that up whatsoever. But maybe they will. The guys that they send out will be competitive, and the change in philosophy is that they're going to actually finally trade away the competitive players and just focus on the young guys so that they can try and win games, because it's good for their development without actually having to risk the opportunity of accidentally winning basketball games. That way they can still put themselves in position to add a really talented player next year. But this is a team that is loaded with recent first-round picks. We've talked about a couple of those teams already. I mean, looking back, they drafted Cody Williams, number 10 overall last year, and he's not even and he shouldn't be, but you have him 11th here in the rotation. He's played a little better in Summer League, just shout out to him, but I'm not overly optimistic that all of a sudden maybe he's going to have a breakout year, but a little bit more optimistic about him, the fact that he isn't abysmal as a second-year player in Summer League. Great to see. How does the rest of this rotation play out? Because right now it's pretty interesting how do we feel confident in many of these players saying that guy's going to play a lot, other than maybe Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler?
Yeah, I think those are the two locked-in players in the starting lineup. Markkanen, I think, will have a big bounce-back season. There's not going to be the concern of this team winning this year, and they've removed enough veteran presence. The guards are so young that it's going to be difficult for them to be able to win many games in the West this season, regardless of who they're playing. I hope that means that we get a full season from Lauri Markkanen. I think that would make sense for them as they try to rehabilitate his value, a common theme that we're hearing across some of these teams, to be able to rehabilitate his value back to where it was before this past season, to be able to potentially move him, even though he's now on a pretty expensive contract, making $46 million this year. It's not cheap to bring Lauri Markkanen in, so you would really need to believe that he could be potentially your second best player on a winning team to be able to bring him in. I don't think that the opinion of him in the league is there right now, and Utah would need to get it back there to be able to move on from him. But maybe it'll just be part of the next great Jazz team, and the next great Jazz team is going to need to include players like Ace Bailey developing into star players. The projected starting five that I'm looking at here, it's jumbo sized. I've changed this a bunch of times just because I think Isaiah Collier starts ultimately for this team. They don't have a lot of other point guard options. Walter Clayton Jr. is more of a combo guard. I mean, he improved his passing ability a little bit this past year at Florida, but it's not necessarily his strength, although I could see him. He's going to play that role to some degree for the Jazz this year. Collier, I have my issues with. I think long-term he's a backup point guard. He cannot shoot, but and defensively it was kind of a wild ride last year, but there is his innate ability to be able to be a bowling ball rolling toward the rim, getting attempts at the rim, drawing fouls. He has that physicality and that ability to be able to be a kind of a walking rim attempt on the court. And I think he's going to get big opportunity again this year. So if you were already in on the Isaiah Collier experience, I think this is going to be the chance to get off for maximum value, but it's going to continue into this year. I would be looking to trade him before your trade deadline this year, because it is entirely possible that this team has someone who jumps over him on their roster by the start of the next season. But there's going to be big fantasy potential this year for Collier. And then the supersized lineup that I'm looking at here with Collier and then Ace Bailey, who functionally is going to be a shooting guard at his weight this year and in his style of play, kind of similar to Brandon Miller. He's not ready to be able to stack up against NBA wings. It's definitely not against NBA power forwards, does not have that level of strength. And he shoots enough to be able to play that kind of role, a shooting guard role, on a NBA roster. Taylor Hendricks, coming off of a pretty nasty broken leg, recovery has gone well. They still think it could take time for him to be fully back to himself, just because that is a difficult injury to be able to come back from. We've seen people like Paul George, Gordon Hayward do it with varying degrees of success, but he's younger than they were when this injury happened. And Hendricks, in the first few games of the season, it's hard to remember because it happened and it was very short before he was hurt, but he was playing the role of defending the other team's best perimeter player early on in the season. I don't think people think of him as like a power forward type. And yes, offensively, he kind of just needs to kind of stand out there, shoot threes. He doesn't do a lot offensively. Defensively, he's shown an ability with his athleticism and lateral movement to be able to slide his feet and stay in front of smaller, quicker players. And I think they need that on this roster, just to have someone to be able to fill that role. That's why he started last year. I think he could have opportunity to do that if the health is there. And that's going to be the question. So that's going to be the piece of information that we're going to need to be able to get in the preseason, in training camp. Is Taylor Hendricks ready to be able to play? Because if he is, I think he's going to play a significant role in this team, that he could start, that he could play pretty good minutes, and we could kind of get back on what we hoped was the rise of Taylor Hendricks that we were starting to see at the start of last season. Walker Kessler should be back in store for a big season unless Utah decides to move him. He could start 30 minutes and play 30 minutes a game like he did last year. Hopefully we won't see him trying to shoot high volume threes like we did again at the end of last season when they were trying to lose games. And then beyond that, the Keontae George experience, I don't think they can start him next to Isaiah Collier. I think that's a defensive disaster that even they're not going to be interested in doing, at least in the early portion of the season. Keontae just needs to be able to hit shots. I think there have been improvements in his game in his first 2 seasons in the NBA, but the shot has not fallen. It has to. That has to be part of who he is. He has to become at least a passable defensive player who tries on defense. He has not been that through his first 2 seasons. And that's why right now it's hard to view him as a future starter on this team or any team. He's kind of looking more like a rotation scorer, a bench scorer. And even then, he needs to be able to play more functional defense than he does. We'll see if that happens this season. Bryce Sensabaugh is lighting it up in Summer League. That's what Bryce Sensabaugh does. He did it at Ohio State. He can score. Kid can flat out shoot it. He can get buckets. But he also, last night in 27 minutes, had 6 fouls in 27 minutes. Bryce Sensabaugh does not play defense. He'd rather grab his man than play defense. So there's a limitation. And if you're watching Bryce Sensabaugh in Summer League and thinking this is the guy, this is going to be the next big time scorer for the Utah Jazz, I'd pause there. I think there's an opportunity for him to be able to stick in the league for a long time because of his offensive skill set. But there are limitations there that are the reason that he fell to the back of the first round in that draft, the reason that Utah hasn't given him the keys as a starter. I think he has a good role on this team, that he could play 22. I have him for 22 minutes a night. That could bump up into minutes in the mid-20s later on in the season, but there are limitations to who he is. And the move away from John Collins also opens up opportunity, I think, for Kyle Filipowski, who can play a little bit next to other centers. That it's not, there were some Walker Kessler, Kyle Filipowski minutes because he can stretch the floor. Filipowski does give that opportunity. He could play next to Nurkic or Kessler. I think they will, at least in the beginning of the season, give Nurkic the opportunity to play some backup center minutes. Filipowski will also play some backup center minutes in some lineups that attempt to play 5 out. This could be another big season for Kyle Filipowski. So it's a positive that we've seen John Collins move on, because that clears space where there wasn't really any, or at least not very much, for Filipowski to be able to expand on his rookie season.
Yeah, with Sensabaugh, I think it was 34 he had last night with like 6 threes or something like that. I expect that's what it should be for a player entering his third NBA season playing in summer league. If they're entering their third year and they're absolutely not absolutely dominating, then I'm a little bit concerned. I think there's only a couple conclusions we can truly draw from summer league, and that's, are the third year players like absolutely dominating, or are they not? And then how are the rookies playing? Like, we're not super concerned if a rookie struggles, but maybe we're pretty encouraged if a rookie plays really well, like what we saw with VJ Edgecombe in his first game. But if a third-year player isn't dominating, then I'm a little bit concerned. With Isaiah Collier, I think that there's a chance that, like you said, there could be a different starter on the roster by the start of next season. There could be a different starter on the roster right now. And then it just takes some time for either maybe Keontae George takes a step, maybe Walter Clayton Jr. is able to be pretty good pretty quickly, and they like him as a player that can actually shoot the ball pretty well. I mean, Isaiah Collier, even in summer league, has struggled to score so far. So there is definitely a lot of exciting players, but a lot of very flawed players. So expecting them to add another top pick next year's draft. Moving on to talk about, we got two more teams. The first one I want to talk about is the Suns, and it's kind of interesting how this rotation is going to play out, because they did figure out center, I think, with adding Mark Williams and Kevin Malawach within like 10 minutes of each other, maybe even 2 minutes of each other. So now they have two players that you would say, hey, we have a core of center, or core at center for the future. They still have Bradley Beal on the roster, fully expecting a buyout there. But as of right now, they have Devin Booker, Jalen Green, and Bradley Beal. How do all them play together? You have Ryan Dunn and Dillon Brooks, two really strong defensive players. How does that fit in together? Added Rasheer Fleming as well, and then Royce O'Neal, Grace. Now, like, there's a lot to like here, but I'm not sure exactly how it's all going to actually fit together on the court, and if this team's going to be good enough to play postseason basketball in the Western Conference.
Yeah, with the Suns, I think there's the outlines of a team that almost makes sense now. And here's how I view it. I mean, Devin Booker is going to have the opportunity for a massive season. We've seen Point Booker before, prior to Chris Paul coming into the Phoenix Suns. Devin Booker, when he has kind of that outsized on-ball role, even beyond what he did with Kevin Durant this past season, when it's really just entirely focused on him, the fantasy numbers can be really, really strong. I think we get a bounce-back season from Booker. He's someone that I'd be looking to be able to acquire if there are others who don't see it that way in your league. Jalen Green on this team is, especially if Bradley Beal is going to be bought out, which it sounds like he will, there's going to be a ton of opportunity for Jalen Green as well, because there's really no one else on this roster who can create their own shot if Bradley Beal is gone, other than Jalen Green, beyond Devin Booker. It's Devin Booker, Jalen Green, that's it. So there's going to be a substantial opportunity for Jalen Green to be able to continue to develop and become a more efficient scorer and still have a pretty significant on-ball role, even if Booker has a massive one himself. And then beyond that, I think Ryan Dunn can be kind of the perimeter stopper for them, the guy that you're able to put on your best perimeter scorer. That's what they did with him last year. Dillon Brooks is better against wings and even against power forwards because of his strength. And I think that's where you're going to be able to put him. And having those two out there really protects Mark Williams defensively in a way that he's never experienced in his NBA career before. And if you were a Mark Williams optimist, I would say that this, with Ryan Dunn and Dillon Brooks, Devin Booker being at least a neutral to slightly positive defender when he wants to be, Jalen Green at least able to fit into a real defense last year in Houston and not be a huge liability. There's potential here for maybe the Mark Williams leap forward defensively happens because he has better defensive infrastructure around him. He's not having to face constant blow-bys that he was facing with the Charlotte Hornets last season and being kind of left in no man's land as a big-bodied center, having to deal with guys driving at full speed at him because no one was out on the perimeter to be able to defend them. So I think there's optimism there, but I think long-term for me, the real optimism comes in the development of Kevin Malawach at the center position. I think that he can be long-term the starting center here, and I like him more in Dynasty than I do Mark Williams by a little bit. I just recently put out my latest Dynasty rankings on my Patreon to be able to outline where I think some of the new rookies land. Malawach, I have projected for a smaller role than Mark Williams this upcoming season. I've got him around 20 minutes, Mark Williams at 28, but I could see that shifting depending on how Williams does. Williams' availability, that's another big question as well. We just haven't seen Williams on the court consistently. Malawach will at some point this season season get big opportunity because otherwise it's Nick Richards. We know what that experience looks like at center. I think Malawach is going to be able to grow on this team and long-term will be the starting center here. But there's not a lot else to be able to be excited about on this bench. Colin Gillespie had some nice showing late last season off of the bench for the Suns. He could get the opportunity to be the backup point guard on this team. Grayson Allen will continue to be able to do what Grayson Allen does. I don't expect a lot of change there. And then you've got an opportunity for Rasheer Fleming, who's one of the more interesting second-round pick rookies, goes at number 31. There's kind of a bidding war to be able to get up to that pick. Fleming gets selected, gets a 4-year guaranteed contract from the Suns. He's going to be part of this team going forward, part of the rotation going forward, I think. And if you aren't familiar with Fleming's game, pretty, big wingspan, big frame, was able to shoot the three last year at St. Joseph's for the first time, hit it consistently, shot at a pretty good volume. And he's a defensive event creator, a defensive playmaker with big steal and block rates. So for fantasy, this is kind of the ideal 9-category guy who can also help you in points leagues because he's a solid rebounder as well. I think there's opportunity for Fleming to be able to move into this rotation if he's able to prove to play functional defense, which I think is one of the big questions and swing skills for him. Is the 3 consistent like it was last year at St. Joe's? If that's true, he's got a very good chance of sticking in the NBA, maybe even having starter potential. And can he play functional defense? I think right now he's kind of more of a front court defender than someone that you want to be able to have out on the perimeter. He needs to be able to play NBA rotations defensively consistently. We'll see if that happens, but he's definitely a player on the rise for me, someone who I have much higher than his draft slot in my rookie rankings.
Yeah, I really like Rasheer Fleming, but I think the one thing that you do get into another issue with him in Phoenix is that he's just another player that can do a number of different things, but can't really shot create, can't really create for anyone else. You don't really want him putting the ball on the floor. So right now, assuming they buy out Bradley Beal, then it is just Devin Booker, Jalen Green, and Dylan Brooks also thinks that he fits that mold as well. I'm not going to be the one to tell him that he doesn't, because I'm sure that he will definitely take the opportunity to be a shot creator as well. The last team I want to talk about is the Kings. I think a lot of it is kind of set in stone, pretty similar to this past season, but we have the point guard issue. You currently have Keon Ellis as the starter, and as much as I'd love to see Keon Ellis in a consistent starting role, I think there's definitely a real opportunity that it is Dennis Schroeder, who they just traded for. They have Malik Monk as a guy that did start at point guard for stretches last year, and I think he was productive in that role. I'm not sure that, and I guess that was before, when he became a starter, it was before De'Aaron Fox got traded, and then he was still part of the starting lineup after, but he wasn't as successful then. Devin Carter, who they recently drafted the first round, is also in the mix to play backcourt minutes. And then obviously Sabonis is probably still the best passer on the team, and DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine like the ball in their hands as well. So again, I think this is another situation of a number of talented players. I'm just not sure exactly how successful this team can be with the guys on this roster with the way it's currently constructed. But from a fantasy perspective, I think that's really, we don't need it to be a really good roster. We just need to find out where the fantasy value is going to come from. So what gives you optimism that Keon Ellis is going to be the starting point guard, or do you think there is a chance at Schroeder?
I think that we saw at the end of last season, Doug Christie decided to be able to put Keon Ellis in the starting lineup. We saw a starting lineup that looked like this for a number of games down the stretch throughout the season. And functionally, it makes sense because at his best, Zach LaVine can kind of be a neutral defender. At this point, DeMar DeRozan is not going to be even a neutral defender. Keegan Murray is their best defensive player with Keon Ellis, and he's necessary to be able to have out there as well to be able to have a functional defense around Domantas Sabonis. And that's the issue. If you put Dennis Schroeder or Malik Monk into that starting lineup over Keon Ellis, you end up with too many players who are just not functional defenders in the NBA, and you cannot do that on a team that plays Domantas Sabonis 35 minutes a night. So they should play Keon Ellis as a starter. I don't know if they will. They might do the Kings thing, and they might play Dennis Schroeder as the starting point guard. That might have been part of the pitch to be able to get Dennis Schroeder. I don't know. I'm more projecting what I think they should do, but the roster construction here to me does not make a lot of sense. So I'm not going to assign rational thinking to the Sacramento Kings. I'm not going to start doing that because they haven't shown it. Because beyond, when you look at this roster, you know what the starting lineup's going to look like, at least with LaVine, DeRozan, Murray, and Sabonis. They're going to play big minutes. They're going to be starters. Beyond that, you've got Keon Ellis, Dennis Schroeder, Malik Monk, and Devin Carter, who are all guards and varying different skill sets, but smaller overall, for that being such a big part of your overall rotation. And then Nick Clifford, I think can be potentially a rotation level player in his rookie season because he's an older rookie. Kind of showed a great all around game last year at Colorado State. You're in a position right now. Trey Lyles is gone. There's no real functional backup power forward on this team. He might need to be able to fill minutes at forward. And then you have Drew Eubanks, who every team plays Drew Eubanks a little bit. We get excited about it for fantasy when the minutes come up, and then the team gets tired of him and stops playing Drew Eubanks. I think that experience will probably continue this year because another player that got a guaranteed contract, taken in the second round, Maxime Reynaud, is, I think, going to later in this season be the backup center for this team. He really makes sense in lineups that can play 5 out. He gives you that opportunity to be able to play that way. I would love to be able to see him get more opportunity as the season goes on. I don't think the season's going to go particularly well in Sacramento, and that could be opportunity for Maxime Reynaud. I think Dario Saric is washed at this point based on what we saw from him in Denver, and I don't think he's really going to factor into this rotation. So with only Drew Eubanks in the way, there's real opportunity for Reynaud, a guy that I'm taking in the teens in rookie drafts or the early 20s. Because I think that there's opportunity for him to massively outplay his draft slot. I think he kind of artificially got himself pushed down in the draft because of a guaranteed contract from Sacramento and saying that he was not going to be taking two-way deals. And I really like his opportunity to be able to grow into kind of a larger minute rotation center in this league because of the skill set.
Yeah, I really like right now. I wasn't thrilled with the landing spot at first, but hearing like the report that came out that night that it was kind of like I think it was, he did kind of force his way to a little bit down the board because I was a little surprised a couple of the teams that did pass on him. But now it does seem, because I think at first it was, okay, Jonas Valanciunas is still there. Now he's not. I feel less confident that Drew Eubanks is going to push Reynaud for the backup center spot as I did Valanciunas. But again, also not super optimistic in the Kings. I think you put it pretty well there. But that was 12 teams that we talked about in a little less than an hour and a half. So maybe we'll get an opportunity in the future to talk about some of the rest of the teams in depth. But before I let you go, Matt, once again, thank you as always for hopping on and spreading some knowledge on the show. What content can we be on the lookout for from your Patreon? I know obviously that rotation sheet is going to be updated consistently. I don't know. I don't think any major moves have gone down while we're recording that would require that to be updated. But as soon as one does, I'm sure it will be updated rather quickly. And then everything else, what else can we be on the lookout for from you?
Yeah, this is the prime time for Dynasty content. If you want to get ahead of your league, this is the time to be able to do it. As far as I know, there aren't too many resources like the ones that we're putting out right now. You can go to patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP, and we're going to give you that rotation and minutes projection sheet that you were just looking at for all 30 NBA teams. So you can kind of see in real time as moves come in. I'm updating the sheet to be able to show where I think these rotations are going to play out, how minutes are going to play out. This is your tool to be at the front of what is happening with player values and what's going to be happening with these teams going into the new season before anyone else is doing it. Beyond that, in this past week, I just put out both my rookie rankings for Dynasty rookie drafts. The version that I'm about to put out this week has 250 players. That includes every single rookie who was drafted, every rookie who's on a two-way contract, every rookie who's on an Exhibit 10 contract, every rookie who was invited to Summer League, and every rookie who otherwise has not yet been invited, signed over in Europe, was on a workout, and was in and part of this 2025 NBA draft class pool. So that right now is at 250 players. We're digging deep because guys come out of the woodwork every year, whether it's in Summer League or if it's later on coming in through the G League. We want to know who these players are. If you want to be able to get into the real gems, these rookie rankings are going to help you to be able to do it. The Dynasty rankings, I go as deep as anyone can. It's every single roster player. I think we have over 550 players ranked within those Dynasty rankings, and you're not going to find a bunch of retired players in there. You're not going to find a bunch of things that aren't relevant to your league now. These are real actionable Dynasty rankings for both points and categories leagues. I pride myself on keeping them updated every month throughout the season. So in season, you're going to get those constant monthly updates as values change. In the offseason, we're going to be changing them as developments occur. every rookie who was drafted on a guaranteed contract or on a two-way contract is ranked. So you have over 74 rookies inside of these rankings, along with all the NBA veterans ranked amongst them. Projections for the career peaks of these players in category leagues. So you can get an idea of how does this stat set, once this guy develops, fit into my build for my team? How are these guys going to fit together in the future? These rankings are going to help you do that. So all of that is at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. And if you're new to it, sign up for a 7-week trial. You don't have to pay a dime. Try it out. You get access to everything. If you like it, great. Please stay on. We'd love to have you in our community. And if not, I hope it's helpful for what you're doing in your Dynasty offseason. But Noah, thank you for having me on. I'd love to come back and be able to talk about the other 18 teams that we didn't get to. Maybe we can go for 2 hours next time.
100%. I know we definitely can if we were able to clear out the time in our schedules. But again, thank you, Matt. You guys can, as he dropped the link for his Patreon, check that out. And then also you can follow him on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP. As he said, it is the best time for Dynasty content, and nobody else has 250 rookies ranked, I guarantee you. So if you want the most in-depth rankings, you know where to find them. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. And I'll see you guys next time.